Thank you for joining us on our Pacific Northwest road trip. We are heading just north of Redding, California to the Lake Shasta Caverns. To see the caverns takes a bus ride from the visitor center to the boat dock, a boat over to the other side of the lake, and another bus ride up the mountains to the caverns entrance. As you can see here, there is a water shortage as well. The caverns are dated at least 200 million years and were formed by water. The definition of cavern is one of large indefinite extent. If you ask the park ranger, they say caverns usually have formations such as stalactites and stalagmites, where caves do not. Over the years, water drained through the topsoil into the earth, leaving the caverns as we see today. The caves are made entirely of limestone and feature a wide variety of formations. Some of these formations are called stalactites, stalagmites, soda straws, columns, and flowstone. To remember the difference between a stalactite and a stalagmite might reach the ceiling. A stalactite is holding on tight to the ceiling. The first recorded explorer was James A. Richardson, a federal fisheries employee. Until 1964, Lake Shasta caverns were seen each year only by a handful of hardy spelunkers. They inched their way through steep, restricted natural fissures to view its startling formations. The definition of spelunkers is a person who explores caves.
Standing at 85 feet tall. Now, when geologists look at a dome like this one, they refer to it as a breakdown dome.
Before opening to the public, a new entrance was needed, as the current was a small hole in the ceiling, barely large enough for one person to fit through. Using explosives, workers blasted a tunnel from a rock face deep into the mountain, hoping to reach the lowest known room, the basement. However, along the way, a large rock wall was knocked down, revealing the discovery room, perhaps the most fascinating room in the caverns. The idea of preserving this natural phenomenon first came to Grace M. Tucker, an attorney from Washington State. In 1955, she attained sole ownership of the caves. And in 1959, Miss Tucker, along with Roy Townsend and his two brothers, formed Lake Shasta Properties, Inc. The site was declared a national landmark in May of 2012.
Take it all in, my friend, because not only is this room the last room on the tour, but it is the last and in fact the best opportunity to get a photo with your group, your spouse, your family.
I'm sure you're familiar with the term, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Well, here it is. Mount Shasta is potentially an active volcano, located at the southern end of the Cascade Range in Siskiyou County, California, at an elevation of 14,179 feet. It is the second highest peak in the Cascades and fifth highest in the state. From the Lake Shasta Caverns, we drove most of the night, and the next morning we arrived at the Edmonds-Kingston Ferry. This was mine, Ryan's, and Miko's first trip, bringing a vehicle on a ferry. Once we arrived at the Kingston Ferry Terminal, we made our way north up the Olympic Peninsula to Port Townsend. Here we're traveling over the Hood Canal floating bridge. Once arriving in Port Townsend, we were pretty surprised what a cool town this was. I mean, our hotel was downtown, almost the center of town, and where the Wooden Boat Festival was located was right there at the end of town, so it made getting around very easy. The Palace Hotel was our choice of accommodations for the next 2 nights. Designed and built by Henry L. Tibbles, a retired sea captain, constructed this classic 3-story brick building in 1889 for $28,000. It was named the Captain Tibbles Building and is a beautiful example of the Port Townsend turn-of-the-century architecture. The first floor of the Captain Tibbles Building originally housed a billiard parlor and saloon known as the Townsend Tavern, while the upper 2 floors provided furnished rooms for rent. From the mid-20s to the mid-30s, the upper 2 floors of the building were known as the Palace Hotel, affectionately nicknamed the Palace of Suites. Yep, we stayed at a brothel, and each room had its own name, and ours, fortunately, was Miss Mona. The room was pretty awesome, except one thing. The bathroom was across the hall. Now, it was our own private bathroom. No one else used it, but still. Anyway, the architecture in Port Townsend is pretty cool. The view from the front of the hotel was memorizing, just watching the sailboats bob up and down in the bay there. So the next morning we get up and we're heading to check out the Wooden Boat Festival, but first, on the way to visit the YouTube channel Samson Boat Company, we walked along the coast and Ryan found a beach full of driftwood. While I watched the ferry, Ryan was digging through the beach to try to find that one piece of driftwood that's suitable to take home. In 2020, Port Townsend's population was 10,148. Its natural scenery at the northeast tip of the Olympic Peninsula is spectacular. The city is known for its many Victorian buildings remaining from the late 19th century heyday. Port Townsend is called the City of Dreams because of the early speculation the city would be the largest harbor on the west coast. Heading south of town to the Port Townsend Shipwright Co-op, we got in line to see the 1909 built Tally-Ho. We have watched Leo, the boat owner and builder, on his YouTube channel since the inception. If you would like to watch the rebuild and restoration of the Tally-Ho, go to Samson Boat Company on YouTube. We turned the corner and didn't see a whole lot of people. Then we really turned the corner and couldn't believe the line. Wow, he's much more popular than we ever thought. It was amazing, everyone chattering about him. Oh, and here he is on his bicycle, probably going to film the line for his YouTube channel.
Hi, Leo!
Hey!
And wouldn't you know it, when we got back home and watched the next episode of Samson Boat Company, there we were, him filming us as I filmed him. That was awesome. If you by chance watch the Tally-Ho channel on YouTube, you get to know some of these faces. These guys are the regulars that have been helping and working on this boat for many years. Finally, it was our turn to get up close and personal with the boat. It was pretty exciting to see this from what it was in the early days to now. It's remarkable. I remember when they melted all the lead and poured that keel. I mean, every inch of this boat we've watched on YouTube. Leo's mission is to rebuild this 112-year-old, as of 2022, English sailing yacht called the Tally-Ho. Designed by Albert Strange in 1909, she is well known and an important vessel as well as historic. In 1927, she won the Fastnet race. But after many adventures, she was left in a remote port in Oregon to rot for decades. Despite some valiant attempts to rescue her, Leo bought her for $1 and moved her to the Olympic Peninsula. These images here may give you a slight idea of the condition of the overall boat. The companionways here are the caps to them. you can kind of see, but I'll tell you what, the rest of the boat was in much worse condition. It was clever how they rigged a mirror so we could see the reflection of the engine installed. Anyway, I got a picture with the parrot, I got a picture with Leo. It was a great start to an amazing day. From the Port Townsend Shipwrights Co-op, we walked back into town and headed over to the Wooden Boat Festival. The Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival is held at the beginning of fall every year in Port Townsend, Washington. It's one of the biggest gatherings of wooden boats, their builders, and enthusiasts in the world. The first Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival was held in 1977. The Port Hudson Harbor is filled with hundreds of wooden boats, including double-enders, cutters, tall ships, classic powerboats, working vessels, rowboats, shells, kayaks, and more. The Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival is one of the most enlightening and exciting wooden boat events in the world. The annual festival features over 300 wooden vessels, hundreds of indoor and outdoor demonstrations. This is the who's who of wooden boat experts and thousands of wooden boat enthusiasts. Here's some examples of the and more. A wooden bicycle frame that weighs nothing. It's like a feather. And look at this travel trailer with a canoe rack on top. Check this out. The speakers like Nigel Calder and Lynn Parday were amazing to see live and in person. I own many of their books. The festival has expanded a little each year, continuing to honor its traditions while inviting enthusiastic debate, demonstration, with regard to the latest innovations in boat building equipment, skills, and adventure. The tall ship Lady Washington is the official state ship of Washington. A traditionally built replica, she was launched in 1989 for the state's centennial. The original vessel played a major role in American history, departing Boston, Massachusetts on a trading mission on September 30th, 1787. The mission was the first American voyage around Cape Horn. She established critical relations and trade with the native peoples of the Pacific and helped enter the young United States into the world stage. Named after Martha Washington, George Washington's wife, the First Lady of the United States. Highlights of her career included Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, the IMAX film The Great American West, and reoccurring background piece in Revolution. To wrap up this amazing day, our friends ferried over from Whidbey Island and we all went out to dinner. Say hello to Phil and Caroline. The next morning, we all headed out for some sightseeing. Hey, Mom, Ryan is an angel. Anyway, we head to the Port Townsend City Hall, which was built in 1891 and at a cost of $30,000. Isn't that amazing what money could buy back then? The City Hall was listed on the National Register of Historical Places in 1971. From the Port Townsend City Hall, we headed north to Fort Worden Historical State Park. Once we parked the truck, we took a hike around this loop and saw all kinds of crazy and fun stuff. Look, Mom, deer! We saw deer. That was pretty cool. Fort Worden was an active United States Army base from 1902 to 1953. It was purchased by the state of Washington in 1957 to house juvenile detention facility. In 1971, it was transferred to the Washington State Parks and Recreation Committee. In the 1890s, the inlet was considered strategic to the defense of Puget Sound, and that three forts, Fort Worden, Fort Flaggard, and Fort Casey, were built at the entrance with their powerful artillery creating a triangle of fire to thwart any invasion attempted by sea. Fort Worden, at the extreme northeastern tip of the Olympic Peninsula, sits on a bluff near Port Townsend, anchoring the northwest side of the triangle. The three posts were designed to prevent a hostile fleet from reaching such targets as the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard and the cities of Seattle, Tacoma, and Everett. The three forts never fired a hostile shot, and all the armory was removed either in World War I or World War II. Memories Vault is a memorial installation and sculpture garden comprised of 28 elements by artist Richard Turner. The installation includes remnants of the Fort Worden Barracks, constructed between 1898 and 1907. The installation was created as a place for contemplation of nature, of man, and his intentions. After completing our hike around Fort Worden, we headed on down to the beach. To meet our ferry reservation, we had to head over back into Port Townsend, and passing the Sex Express, we headed to the ferry terminal for our transit to Whidbey Island.
So those are the standby people over there? Or waiting for the next ferry?
Yeah. I think it was worth that 3 hours to make the reservation, wasn't it?
Definitely. Bye, Port Townsend.
Oh my God.
Port Townsend was an amazing throwback in time. It's currently the 89th largest city in the state of Washington. The city also houses one of two bell towers known to exist in the United States. It is 125 feet tall and was used to summon volunteer firefighters during emergencies. The other bell is located in Helena, Montana. The largest employer in Port Townsend is the paper mill. The size of the town is 9.5 square miles, and in 1981, Fort Worden was the central filming location for the 1982 movie An Officer and a Gentleman. The brown haze you're seeing is from forest fires up in Canada, and the smoke is blowing south into Washington state. As the crow flies, Port Townsend's just about 35-40 miles from the Canadian border. We return to our vehicles and prepare for our arrival at Whidbey Island. Whidbey Island is the largest of the Washington state islands, and its nickname is The Rock. This will be our home for the next few days. Our friends provided us amazing guest rooms and accommodations, but we opted to just camp on the property with the truck. How often do Southern California kids get to sleep in a forest? It was amazing. Whidbey Island is about 30 miles north of Seattle and lies between the Olympic Peninsula and the I-5 corridor of western Washington. The island forms the northern boundary of Puget Sound. The state parks and natural forests are home to numerous old-growth trees. According to the 2010 census, the island was home to 69,000 residents, with an estimated 29,000 of those living in rural locations. Whidbey Island is approximately 37 miles from north to south and varies between 1.5 to 10 miles wide, making it the 40th largest island in the United States. We head to the most northern point of the island, Deception Pass. Deception Pass Bridge is the common name for two-lane bridges on Washington State Route 20 connecting Whidbey Island and Fidalgo Island. Construction began in August of 1934 and it was completed in July of 1935. The cost of the New Deal era construction was $482,000. The bridge just received its third repainting at a cost of $22.6 million. It retains its current color named Evergreen Green using lead-free paint. The height from the water to the roadway is about 180 feet depending on the tide. The bridge was listed in the National Park Register of Historical Places in 1982. We decided to hike on down to the beach and check it out. What a sight to see. Talk about driftwood. Ryan was in heaven. Well, I parked myself on a log and watched the people fishing. Now, you've always heard of the one that got away. Check this out. I caught it just in time, and dang, that one got away. Look, Mom, more deer. It's so exciting. Probably sounds silly to most, but if you're from Southern California, wow, seeing a deer in the wild is pretty amazing. From Deception Point, we headed south to Fort Eby or Ebby State Park. The park is about 5 miles west of Coupeville and covers 651 acres. The fort was built on Partridge Point in 1942 as a World War II coastal defense near the mouth of Puget Sound. The fort was named after Isaac Neff Eby or Ebby, a pioneering homesteader on Whidbey Island. From Fort Ebby, we head south to Fort Casey, which I'm really excited about because up until now, every fort we visited, you would see where the gun turrets were, but I heard there's actual guns here at Fort Casey. Let's check it out. Fort Casey is located on Admiralty Inlet and was considered so strategic to the defense of Puget Sound during the 1890s. Finally, we get to see some guns. The two 10-inch guns on disappearing cartridges currently mounted at Fort Casey were transferred from the Philippines in the 1960s, along with two 3-inch guns. Now, this was amazing. These things were in pristine shape. I was so excited to climb up and around them, and I was fascinated how they just kind of peek out over the top when they're being fired, and then they disappear back down below. It is pretty doggone cool. Construction on Fort Casey began in 1897, and in 1901, the big guns on disappearing cartridges, which could raise out of their protective emplacements so the guns were exposed only long enough to fire, became active. However, the fort's batteries became obsolete almost as soon as their construction was completed. Fort Casey was named for Brigadier General Thomas Lincoln Casey, a U.S. Army Chief of Engineers designed as part of the massive modernization program of U.S. seacoast fortification. Look, Mom, more deer! So cool! Admiralty Head Light, as it's called, is on the grounds of Fort Casey. This 30-foot tall lighthouse constructed of brick and stucco was built in 1903. Design incorporates thick walls meant to withstand earthquakes and the concussions of Fort Casey's guns. No trip would be complete unless we checked out a marina and looked at some boats. And boy, there's a lot of boats here. It sure was fun walking around. As Carol and I share a one-day apart birthday every year, this is the first time we were ever together for them, and she whipped up an amazing dinner, and look, Mom, I had cake on my birthday. The next morning, we bid farewell, headed back into Seattle, and I dropped Ryan off at the airport so he could fly home, and I continued on towards Glacier National Park. I was grateful to find a cool campground near St. Regis, Montana, and had an amazing night stay. Then got up and headed towards good old Glacier National Park. It was concerning the more I drove northeast of the haze in the air from those forest fires in Canada. I was hoping it wouldn't affect my time at Glacier National Park, but it kind of did, but that's all right. I still got to see all the sights and the beauty it had to offer. Arriving at Glacier National Park, at the park entrance, they were flying both the U.S. and Canadian flags at half-mast. Queen Elizabeth had just passed the day before my arrival. Glacier National Park is located in northwestern Montana on the Canadian-United States border. The park encompasses more than 1 million acres and includes parts of 2 mountain ranges, more than 130 named lakes, more than 1,000 different species of plants, and hundreds of species of animals. This vast, pristine ecosystem is the centerpiece of what has been referred to as the crown of the continental ecosystem, a region of protected land encompassing 16,000 square miles. Upon the arrival of European explorers, it was dominated by the Blackfeet in the east and the Flathead Native Americans in the western regions. And here we are, coming up to our first glacier. The haze is so bad from the fires in Canada, and it's so far away, you really have to zoom in with your camera. But there you go. There's a glacier in Glacier National Park. Glacier Park's mountains began forming 170 million years ago when ancient rocks were forced eastward up and over the much younger rocks, known as the Lewis Overthrust. These sedimentary rocks are considered to have some of the finest examples of early life fossils on Earth. The current shapes of the Lewis and Livingston mountain ranges and positioning and size of the lakes show the telltale evidence of massive glacier action, which carved U-shaped valleys and left behind moraines that impounded water, creating lakes. Of the estimated 150 glaciers, over 25 acres in size, which existed in the park in the mid-19th century during the late Little Ice Age, only 25 active glaciers remain. Here's another glacier. It's a little difficult to see due to the haze caused by the Canadian forest fires, but actually what you're seeing here on the camera was better than I could see standing there. To see the glaciers requires hiking to them, which requires a campsite, which requires reservations in advance. To put things in perspective, I left the Washington West Coast, traveled northeast to Glacier National Park, the yellow line is the Canadian border, and then took the Going to the Sun Road. I entered on West Glacier, traveled the road to end up in St. Mary's. However, all the turnouts and everything you want to see are going from east to west. So my recommendation is enter at St. Mary's and travel west, because the road is very small, very narrow, and to cross traffic to those little tiny pullouts is absolutely impossible. Here's another hazy glacier in the far distance. So I resigned myself to driving all the way to the East Glacier entrance and turning around and going back through so I could take advantage and get in line for those pullouts. Round trip was over 6 hours for less than 50 miles. Make sure you get a map when you come in the park because, as you know, there are no cell towers in national parks. This place is huge. So the entire time you have no phone service, and if you camp outside the parks, you also don't have phone service. I went 3 days in this area without any phone service. Sorry, Mom, I tried to text, but I just couldn't. Forest fires are common in the park. There has been a fire every year of the park's existence except 1964. 64 fires occurred in 1936, the most on record. In 2003, 6 fires burned approximately 136,000 acres, more than 13% of the park. Look, a white mountain goat. That is awesome. Scientists studying the glaciers in the park have estimated that all active glaciers may disappear by 2030 if current climate patterns persist. Heading back west on the Going to the Sun Road sure has its advantages. To access those pullouts and see all of this is striking. Glacier National Park has almost all its original native plants and animal species. Large mammals such as grizzly bears, moose, and mountain goats as well as rare or endangered species like wolverines and Canadian lynxes inhabit the park. Hundreds of species of birds, more than a dozen fish species, and a few reptiles and amphibian species have been documented. Glacier National Park borders Waterton Lakes National Park in Canada. The two parks are known as the Western Glacier International Peace Park and were designated as the world's first international peace park in 1932. You can see here in the bedrock the scarring the glaciers left as they receded. Both parks were designated by the United Nations as biosphere reserves in 1976, and in 1995 as World Heritage Sites. In April 2017, the joint park received a provisional gold tier designation as Waterton Glacial International Dark Sky Park through the International Dark Sky Association, the first transboundary dark sky park. My trip to Glacier National Park was well worth it, even with the hazy, smoky skies. To see this beauty and those pristine, crystal clear waters of the melting glaciers running down the river was fantastic, absolutely amazing. When I spoke about no phone signal, it wasn't that I wanted to call anyone. It was I lost all my Google Maps. I had no way to navigate except for street signs. And who's done that in a while? This glacier reminded me of a bow tie. It's funny, I didn't post a lot of photos because they came out really foggy compared to the video with the fire haze. So, all in all, this is the best I could do, but it was amazing. My next video will be the trip back down Washington, Oregon, and California coast, so stay tuned. Love you, Mom!